Welcome. Welcome to Schiable Auditorium, to an amazing night that was put together, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. But first I want to tell you, if you've got a cell phone, take it out and turn it off or turn it on silent, because we do not want to know if somebody wants to get a hold of you. Okay? And this is going to be, this, of course, like all the other events that we've had this summer, is being recorded by that gentleman that's sitting right here. And if you know of people who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't be here, it will be on our website, which is summerSessions.uaf.edu/summer, along with all the other events that we have been offering this summer. And you will be able to find it in about 2 weeks. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit before we begin about the fact that we've been doing a lot of things this summer, and this is the last week. Summer camps wound up last week on Friday, but we still have 3 events in addition to this one that's happening this week. There's AI for Healthcare in Alaska, where we are and where are we heading with Dr. Doss, and that's going to be in the BP Design Studio. Mike Powers up there is our amazing host for the Alaska Health Series, the Healthy Living Lecture Series that we have done. This is the 10th one, and that'll be tomorrow night. Wednesday night, right here, Lenny Kamerling, and I know a lot of people here are devotees of Lenny Kamerling and his work. He's going to be showing The Drums of Winter, which is this dance film, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, do come back out here on Wednesday night, and Lenny will be here afterwards to discuss it. So that's happening. No, it's going to be right here, because the viewing is a whole lot better, and we're expecting at least all of you to be here and then some, okay? And on Thursday night, our final Music in the Garden. How can that happen? We start on the 22nd of May, and this is the 13th concert. Our own Susan Grace will be there, as well as E.T. Barnett. All right? So that's happening on Thursday night. We do have other music concerts coming up. The Let Us Be Thankful concert, which will be on the 30th of November. That's the Saturday night following Thanksgiving. The Here Comes the Sun concert, when the sun is actually coming back in January 1st. It'll be the second Saturday in January. Okay, so that's coming up. This summer, we ran 125 day camps. We filled 2,300 spaces. There were over 1,000 kids on the waiting list. Where there were hundreds of people that came out Monday through Wednesday. Every Thursday night, there were over 700 people that would show up in the garden, and that was so, we feel so grateful for the response for our community, for the efforts that we put forth. So thank you for coming out, and we look forward to doing it again next summer, only bigger and better. Okay, the newest thing on the block, for those of you who have traveled with us, and I look out in the audience and I see David, I see Clark, Karen, etc. We have Colombia, in South America in February. You know what it's like here in the first week in February? You could be in beautiful green Colombia, charming, colorful Colombia. If anybody would like to see the itinerary, I've got a couple of copies of it, and we open registration tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Okay? So, we had 43 events that were scheduled, and then Dan O'Neill happened to show up at, was it Randy Zarke's? Is that the one that you showed up? And there he was, and I thought, what an opportunity. So we talked, and he said he would be willing to do it, and I said, would you be willing to do it with Dermot? I mean, how much better? So they're here to discuss Dan's new book, The Impertinent Question, The Words and Adventures of a Liberal Columnist at a Conservative Newspaper in the Red State of Alaska. This is his newest book. He has written 5. Dermot has written 10. I don't know what that has to do with anything except that we will enjoy listening to them both. So I'm going to turn this over to both of you. Thank you both for your willingness to do it. They're going to talk about an hour, and then there will be a Q&A for about 15 minutes following it. Okay? All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And my name is Robert Hannon. No, my name is Dermot Cole, and this is Dan O'Neill. I wanted to make note, I think Michelle is the longest-serving employee of the University of Alaska in its history, I think. Now, I may be wrong about that, but I think it's about 50 years. And it was about 50 years ago. I had my first job in Fairbanks, which was as janitor in this building. I cleaned Schiable Auditorium every night, and the first floor and the basement of the Bunnell building.
Let me interrupt
The
you.
president's desk, that's when Robert Hyatt was president, and his desk was always clean. It was clean. It was always clean.
I just want to say that my first job before I got out of college was also as a janitor at the same school. So I have that in common.
Jeez. That's a convergence of some kind.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Being here tonight reminds me of something. I taught one class in my many years here. And in fact, it might have been Michelle that talked me into this, but I'm not sure. But it was a Fairbanks history class, which I taught in the old courthouse downtown. And I had some guest speakers, one of whom was to be Dr. Terrence Cole, who, showed up late as usual. And so and we had a plan as to what he was going to talk about. So he comes in, he sits down, and he goes like this. Okay, all right, what are we going to talk about? He did, and my jaw dropped because, he was supposed to have prepared something. Anyway, Dan, I know you had some experience with my brother.
Yeah.
How did he prepare for certain events you went on?
Well, I always think of the time I invited him to go to Chitna, which he had never done. And he said, okay, kind of hesitantly, but anyway, he was going to come. And so I picked him up, and he didn't exactly have fishing clothes on, and he did have a briefcase. So
doesn't everybody bring that to Chitna? No.
So we go down there, and I guess I got a little crazy about getting fish because he kept saying to me, Dan, they're only fish. They're only fish. You can buy fish in the store. But anyway, I had this little ratty piece of old dog line that was probably 20 years old and pretty iffy. And I used it to go down this little cliff where a guy told us he had done really well. But you kind of had to stand on this little pinnacle, and you used this ratty dog rope to get there. And Terrence just could not believe this and kept saying, they're only fish. Dan. And he thought I was crazy. But anyway, he sat up in the woods with his briefcase open, grading papers the whole time. Oh, good fish, Dan, good fish. Anyway,
Now,
that's Terrence.
that is not in this book. That story's not in this book. But there are a lot of really good stories in this book, and there are copies available in the back when we're done. And, I think Dan will sign them.
Yeah,
For how much extra is that?
50 cents a letter.
All right. So,
Apostrophe, 10 cents.
But I recommend it. I really enjoyed reading this. And I won't say even though they were old columns. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the book because of that. And you make the point in here how many of these issues are with us today, and I completely agree with that. Most everything you deal with in this book, from missile defense to the really important question of whether or not you should wash your potatoes before you store them for the winter, are issues that exist today.
That's true.
And
One or two in between that range.
the credibility of Alaska news coverage, and broader news coverage as well, is also addressed in this book. And so we're going to get into some of this. Well, as opposed to me just blabbing all the time, do you have something you want to say to start?
You talk less than Terrence.
Wrong. Okay.
Because he would never have asked that. He'd be too busy. No, go ahead.
Well, I just thought maybe you could introduce this as to why you're inflicting this on the American public.
Oh,
right now.
okay. Well, I guess a number of reasons. I put a lot of work into it, and so it does feel a little like a gyp if you put a lot of work into something and it's out for one day, then it's fish wrapping in the garbage or the wood stove. But moreover, I saw that there were a lot of issues that we still face that I put myself to the trouble of sorting out as best I could. And I felt like, hell, we could use going through this exercise now. So there just were so many parallels between the issues that I was dealing with 20 years ago now, and today in the Trump era, most particularly. So I tried to, select pieces that were relevant and, if impertinent, and write a little bit of connection. There's like a little paragraph or two of italicized introduction, context, setting, and relation to today in that book. So pretty much everybody so far, except maybe you said it, has said some version of these could have been written yesterday. So.
Well, I think that's...
You're buying that?
I would say that as well, yeah.
Okay, good. That makes it unanimous.
And I think that Nancy Lohr's review in the Anchorage Daily News, I think she touched on that point. I did agree with her, by the way, about the dates. I think you should have put dates in here. But that's a tiny point. We don't want to get hung up on that. No. But let's talk with this about one of your opening pieces here, politics and the media, and you deal with the Stepovich campaign for governor, or
Senate.
You're right. He was governor. Stepovich campaign for U.S. Senate against Ernest Greening in 1958.
Correct.
Right. And you found in that example, which I happen to completely agree with you on, that the newsminer was really heavily invested, so to speak, in the Stepovich campaign.
It was, yeah.
And so why don't you tell me a little bit about that? But I'll just introduce this. The first paper I ever wrote as a journalism student here was on the history of a libel suit that emerged from that whole moment of when Drew Pearson sued the newsminer for libel. And it became part of the course event. The case eventually was decided by the Alaska Supreme Court. And it was the first application of the New York Times v. Sullivan rule into a public figure. Someone who was expanding the definition of a public figure to someone who is not a politician, a public employee, which, by the way, is even mentioned in a libel case which is being heard this week in Anchorage, where Governor Dunleavy's former family, a life advisor, has been suing Nat Hertz and the Anchorage Daily News and someone else, whose name I forget, another small outlet, about statements they made when he was fired a couple of years ago. Anyway.
Yeah, that story's not in the book either.
I'm sorry. Tell me about that incident with Stepovich and the coverage of it.
We became a state, and we were allowed to now elect senators and a congressman. And C.W. Snedden and his people very much wanted a local boy, Mike Stepovich, who was also territorial governor, to be the Republican U.S. senator from Alaska, along with Bob Bartlett, I guess, who was kind of a shoo-in. So this was a closely watched race. And in fact, Richard Nixon, who was then vice president, came up to campaign for Stepovich, and JFK, John F. Kennedy, came up to campaign for greening. So it was really of national interest to an extent. When the News Miner found Nixon and Stefovich coming to town, they produced an astonishing 18 articles in 2 days on their visit. So you can imagine that. And then I called it a reportorial love fest because they produced 24 pictures, including 2 full-page, remember when the paper was bigger too? 2 full-page photo spreads of Stefovich. Well, when Greening and JFK came to town, first of all, the News Miner ran a front-page squib that said they probably aren't coming. You know, so, bad weather in June, they're probably not coming. Well, anyway, they came. And they got 1 article, plus an AP wire service article in the interior, and 1 small photo. And then over the next few days, they put in a couple more photos. But it's basically 9 times more stories for the Republican candidate, 6 times more pictures. And in fact, I went and looked at the microfilm. Shows you how much I did run these columns for a long time. I looked through a month of the coverage of Greening the month before the election. And I was looking for photos. And in that month, he appeared once in a group shot that was kind of angling away, this group, and he was way down there, and his head was the size of a pencil eraser. And that was the only picture he got in a month. Now, he would become our senator, and Fairbanksons, really courtesy of the News Miner, knew nothing about the man. So these kinds of errors in editorial judgment, or whatever you'd like to call it, I don't think are random. Snedden was an ardent advocate for Stefovich, and the paper hewed to his vision. I contend that over time, the News Miner continued for generations, really, to be that way, that it didn't fall out randomly, it fell out toward the Republican candidate. And I did a talk, Dermot was there a couple years ago, entitled The Chronic Bias of the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. It's 31 pages long. It is wall-to-wall example. I think the data are solid that it's more than random occurrence, odd error, press of time caused mistakes to be made, kind of excuses that I heard an awful lot.
Okay, now let's get in that just a little bit, because I've given Dan some of the excuses just recently.
Actually, you called me up after that article ran. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Anyway.
You know what? I conveniently forget everything I want to forget. Anyway, but there's no argument for me about the looking at that incident, that Stefovich Greening campaign. Stefovich was, in many ways, the candidate created by the Republican Party. Well, not to put it that way. Snedden had a lot to do with creating and amplifying Stefovich as a candidate.
We should say who Snedden is.
Schiable Snedden. He bought the newspaper, the News Miner, in 1950 from, I guess when he bought it was from the estate of Cap Lathrop. Cap Lathrop, who owned what became the Usability coal mine, KFAR, the News Miner, Olympia Beer,
Empress Theater.
He was a probably the most powerful person in Republican politics in Alaska in the 1940s. So Snedden bought the paper from the estate, improved it vastly, emphasized crime coverage in the 1950s, and became a very strong advocate for Alaska statehood, and didn't hesitate to order up stories on things he favored. He was also key in helping establish the municipal utility system, which was really a crucial development improvement in Fairbanks and various other things. But he was a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and nowhere was that demonstrated more clearly than in his coverage of Mike Stefovich when he was running for Senate. In fact, the News Miner published a calendar featuring Mike Stefovich and his family, and He hated Ernest Greening. And when I did this paper I was mentioning before about this lawsuit, Snedden told me, well, in an interview in 1976, he says, well, I just didn't think he was a very good governor. But he derided him and detested him. My brother covered a lot of this in his book that dealt with the history of Alaska statehood and Snedden's role in it. Anyway, just to finish this thing about the lawsuit, Snedden dictated an editorial. Let me back up. Drew Pearson was the most powerful political columnist in the United States at the time, good friends with Ernest Greening, and he wrote a column saying Mike Stepovich is a Johnny-come-lately about statehood. And Pearson attacked Stepovich and praised Ernest Greening. The Newsminer ran the column and responded with an editorial that said, Drew Pearson was known as the garbage man of the Fourth Estate. And so Pearson sued the Newsminer for calling him the garbage man. And it was very contentious. It stayed in the courts till 1966. The Pearson lost. And it was a very important advance for newspaper freedom in the United States, which is still cited today, as I said before, in lawsuits. And the New York Times v. Sullivan was the landmark 1964 U.S. Supreme Court ruling on libel that still kind of governs libel law in the United States today, and it's under attack along with many other things. But anyway, yes, that was a great example. Snedden, but let's. So and that's one column that you have in there. You have another one, sort of not along the same lines, but something similar. When in 1997, I think, Clinton's State of the Union address was given, and you wrote a column. Maybe you wrote a letter and complained that why did the Newsminer publish the Republican response and not the story on Clinton?
Well, let me tell the story.
Okay.
I could write a paper on Drew Pearson now.
Okay, all right.
All right. It was, the State of the Union happened, and I understood from the radio, there was a couple of interesting bits in there, and so I went to the Newsminer to read about it, and I found that the Newsminer did not write a story about the State of the Union speech. They only ran stories about the Republican reaction to the speech, which, you think, give him a break. The thing was, he introduced the first balanced budget in 30 years. He was presiding over a booming economy. He had every right to connect his policies with that prosperity, which he did. That was the news of the day. The Newsminer didn't report the news of the day. They reported the sort of snarling reaction of our Republican congressional delegation and the odd other national Republican who also found fault with the talk. So I had seen enough of that for a while, and I wrote Sam Bishop a long letter. I just saw it not too long ago, too. It was 4 or 5 pages, single space. And it was kind of like, example after example after example after example. This is what you do, both on the editorial side and in the news reportage side, and it's not journalism, it's not fair. I want a column, I asked politely, to present a more progressive, liberal point of view, to include criticism of the newspaper where I thought it deserved it from time to time. And so what Sam told me was, and we were talking a little bit about this, but I think I might have called Dermot or pitched Dermot, or Terrence pitched Dermot on my behalf or something, but I kind of remember you, now they say reaching out. I might have reached out to you. But anyway, Sam took it to the editorial board as he told me, and they were okay with it, except the idea of me criticizing the paper. They were not okay with that. And Sam said, as I recall, he said he pushed back and said, well, none of my other columnists have any prescriptions about what they can write, so, and they relented. And then the funny story is that the third column I ever wrote is this one, we just went through the Stepovich one, and I gave it to my wife to read before I sent it in, and she said, so, you only wanted to write 2 columns. But I figured, we might as well see if this thing is going to work. So I sent it in, and I didn't have any blowback from Sam at all. And whether he took heat, I don't know. But I say there in the book, he was real decent to me all the way along. He'd call me up if he wanted to change a comma. And if he had something he wanted to talk through to make sure I had the goods on it or was thinking straight, we'd talk it out. And I was appreciative of that, too. Anyway, we got along well.
He didn't do that job very long, but not because of any, that was shortly before he went to Washington.
DC.
He's one of the more thoughtful and competent and patient people that I've ever met.
That's what I need.
Doing newspaper work. No, he's an exceptionally talented guy. I've always thought if you ever lost out in the woods, he'd be a good guy to save your ass, basically, because he's really talented outdoors person. But let's see. My response to that, the 2 guys who placed these stories in the paper at the time were mainly Marvin Aronson and Andy Williams, both of whom are long since deceased. And I told this to Dan the other day, there's a shoveling operation. I mean, you didn't have time to think about anything. And you didn't have time to think if you're doing this in the right way. And the few minutes you've spent describing this, that's probably 3 or 4 times more effort than they put into deciding to use that story and write the headline. Because there just wasn't enough time to think about anything. And today it's even worse with the much smaller staff there. So you would have benefited a bit from knowing how much of a shoveling operation it was. Oh, here's this, do it. That's it, you're done with thinking. But were you correct? Yes, yeah. Was that a dumb thing to do? Yeah.
Well,
but I would not say it was because of a Republican bias. That's all.
Okay. Well, I would say if that were true, if it were sort of random errors occasioned by the press of time, like I said before, it would have fallen out roughly evenly, roughly 50-50, but it wasn't that way. And I would challenge you to come up. I got 31 pages. You give me 1 page on this. I don't think you can find it, really. And I would have profited by being in the newsroom and seeing day-to-day operations, absolutely. But I had a lot of friends in there, too. I knew a lot of the journalists. And there were some good ones. Some I knew, some I didn't. Stan Jones, John Creed, Sherry Simpson, Jennifer Bryce, Kyle Hopkins, Matt Buxton. Some I knew, some I didn't. Some I saw socially. They talked to me about what happened in there. And Marvin, he was chronic in this way. I could show you another example in my pile here, where editing for space, he takes out all of the opposition, all of it, and only it, and leaves, what he left was false, fake news. I use that word, and now it's popular, but the result was on page 1 of the News Miner, a story about North Korean missiles being able to reach Alaska with ICBMs, including nuclear-tipped ICBMs. Well, that's just not true. And it's right alongside a column, an article on missile defense in Alaska, which they were pushing for hard. And here's the justification for it on page 1. It was entirely untrue, and had he put the opposition part in, people at least would have known that actual arms control experts said it's not true. Mm-hmm. The people who were saying it was true was a Republican group in Congress, which would not admit Democrats into it who tried to get into it, and it was false. It was at odds with the actual assessment of our intelligence establishment.
And I don't dispute what you're saying. And I sort of remember that topic, and there was a lot of, gas baggery
At my work,
related to
you stole that.
missile defense, and there still is. Let's get into that in 1 second. But at that time, I think there's a recurring theme in your books, because it's been a recurring theme in Alaska history, and that is, anytime somebody has an idea that looks like it's going to bring a lot of money this way, it's championed as a great idea. And Project Chariot was one, the Rampart Dam was another. The missile defense certainly fit right in with that. And to this day, I still think about, that there never has been a test firing of any of the anti-missile missiles at Fort Greely, because of the danger that part of it will be dropped on Fairbanks or Anchorage.
There's never been a end-to-end test. There's never been
a complete test of the system.
And we deployed it at the cost of $100 billion.
But it is portrayed as a system that works. Now, the reality is we don't know. I mean, it's been described as, you have to hit a bullet with a bullet, but
it's actually,
I think it's a lot harder than that.
Yeah.
And because of decoys, that's what even the North Koreans could use decoys to disguise what might be the real missile and what's just an empty target that one of these anti-missile missiles would hit. I didn't want to delve into that too quickly here, but
just give me a minute.
Go ahead. All right.
This is something I write about.
All right. And I have too. So I know a little bit about this as well.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
Just a
we
little.
kind of do know that they don't work, because the DOD just appropriated $18 billion to replace them. The 44 missiles in Alaska and California are pretty well known not to work. Like I say, they've never been tested, let alone successfully tested end to end.
And it's to deal with so-called countermeasures, I think.
Oh, well, and then there's
That's the decoys.
The reason why any defensive system is implausible is that it's so easy to overwhelm a defensive system. All you have to do is launch a lot of missiles. We have 44. They could launch 1,000. They could launch 10, each of which nose cone comes apart, and you have multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles nuclear tipped. So they could go, each one could go to 5, 6, 8 cities, and you could launch 10, 20 of these. So how does our 44 missiles protect us from that? In addition, they can throw up all kinds of decoys that are not nuclear warheads, but look like them, have the same signature. Which one do you target? Even if you could hit it, which we can't.
But this system was designed to deal with North Korea and Iran, not to deal with an attack from China.
It was designed
or
to feather the
Russia.
nest of the arms industry.
Well, I don't argue with that. Dan, I don't argue with that at all. But the stated no one in a serious discussion would ever say it was designed to counter China or an attack from China or Russia. It was designed to attack so-called rogue launch from North Korea or Iran. Now,
But it can't do that. It really can't do that.
Well, the evidence has not been presented that it would ever work, and that we've never tested, and they've just stopped doing these actual
And
tests.
after they failed enough, they classified the results of the tests.
No, but this leads us to a next
right,
topic.
all right.
Why again?
Issue 3.
Why again I do think many of the columns that Dan wrote have relevance today, and there's a bunch in there on missile defense. Now, it's true all the initials have changed,
That's right.
right?
They keep
But-
changing.
Yeah, they keep changing it. But the point isn't, and we have the new plan is Golden Dome. But before you launch into this, Golden Dome it's Golden, it was Iron Dome.
Right.
It was Iron Dome until February or April or March. And because a certain person likes gold, it became Golden
The
Dome.
Golden Dome.
And to me, I can't get over that. I can't get over that as a laughable. I don't want to hear anybody defend Golden Dome as a good idea when it was Iron Dome, but to make Trump like it, they called it Golden Dome. I mean,
I'm with you. I'm with you all the way.
Anyway, okay. So, but that's why it's relevant, right?
Oh, exactly.
I mean, same
it's
kind
the
of
same
issues.
thing. It really
But,
is.
but maybe $1 trillion this time.
No, I got the figure right here. It's, let's see, I guess since 62, we've spent $531 billion on various missile defenses, none of which work. And, it's 170, it's 175 billion Trump wants to spend on the Golden Dome, and it will be built before his term is up, which is impossible. Even if it existed, the technology doesn't even exist. And I always wonder why, speaking of journalists, why journalists don't get up in press conference where he says these things and say, "Sir, are you lying right now?" What's wrong with that? That's a fair question.
And that number is entirely a complete fantasy. It is.
Getting it built is a fantasy.
Well, it would cost a
He'll
great
spend the
deal
money.
more than 175 billion, because the idea is to stop any attacks from China or Russia or anywhere else, to cover the United States with the Golden Dome.
Do you notice that all the pictures I've seen of the graphic of the Golden Dome and nice and gold, but the globe is rotated so that you can't see Alaska.
It's definitely a
I don't think it covers us.
well, and that, by the way, that one point, that is how the missile defense system became located at Fort Greely,
Right.
and not in North Dakota, because from North Dakota, the lower 48 could be protected quite well. But Ted Stevens made the point that, well, we need to protect, Fairbanks from a nuclear missile.
All
and
50 states.
All
have
50
to be-
states. So
That meant-
to add all of Alaska and Hawaii, you needed to do it here. You couldn't do it from North Dakota. Anyway, but Golden Dome is fantasy is the wrong word. I need a better word than that. And you're right. The Golden Dome images shown by Trump just show the lower 48. No one knows how much it will cost. It will not be in effect by the end of his term. And Senator Sullivan is promoting this as if it's a realistic item. And I'm sure the companies that plan to get contracts on this are excited about it, because the sky's the limit on the investment this will take. But I guess my main gripe, I don't know about yours, but this is the wrong threat. I mean, this is we can spend all of our money trying to stop this, but look at what Ukraine did to Russia with these
Drones.
cheap drones
But-
a couple months ago.
And we should have learned this in 9/11, that it's so much easier for a terrorist group or state to attack us by hijacking an airplane where you have essentially a missile aloft in your enemy's airspace already. You don't have to send it via an intercontinental ballistic missile, which means guidance systems, reentry vehicles, a nuke, none of which they have, but they can easily do these low-tech type attacks. And so, I mean, the real arms experts are always arguing for that kind of defensive measures as opposed to these multi-billion, tens of billions boondoggles. And of course, the other obvious option is arms treaty negotiations, which cost very little and have a whole lot more to do with keeping the world safe than this. In fact, this Golden Dome stuff and missile defense stuff is destabilizing, because our potential adversaries don't like the prospect of us getting a system that works, meaning their capacity for deterrence doesn't exist. So it ratchets up the tension. It's stupid from every angle.
Todd, you're exactly right, I think. So, And that we don't have any Alaska politicians focused on that. To me, I think it's a grave worry. And that we don't have any news coverage of this is another problem. But all of the news institutions today are dramatically weakened and barely surviving.
Except for Dermot Cole, who was the best journalist in Alaska.
No, that's not true.
Doing great work.
This is my hobby. Because I don't have a boss. I like not having a boss. But let's. I thought for years we needed a specialist on covering this, the military expansion, and it's going to become there's an enormous military expansion coming with the tax and spend bill that was recently enacted. And because there's a lot of money for the Pentagon in this, and it should be critically reviewed.
Yeah.
And in essence, we have advocates for military spending, disconnected from the idea of what's really going to keep us safe. Because I agree with you, this is not going to keep us safe. Okay, enough about that. Let's turn the topic a little bit. Now, this isn't it. Unfortunately, this isn't in this book either. But it's something you're quite familiar with, Dan, and that is the story of Dick Cook. And
it's in another book.
It's in another book. This is coming into the country, which I think is a great, the best book on Alaska from the mid-'70s, or over a long period.
I think it's a masterpiece.
I mean, and it's. I think this is better than anything Dan has ever written. It's certainly better than anything I ever wrote. I mean, So anyway, it's a great book. It's a great book. You somewhat retrace what McPhee did in about 2 decades after he wrote Coming Into the Country, dealing with the people in Eagle and the people along the Yukon River. And before I get too far into it, let me just say something. Within the last year, we've lost Jerry Macbeth, Judy Kleinfeld, Mary Erlander, and last week, Steve Haycox. And it's a great... this is a great loss to the study of Alaska history and Alaska, I mean, we're losing a great deal of expertise, and I don't know that there are people who right now are filling in for them, or replacing them, or going to do similar work. These people devoted their lives to studying Alaska and did many wonderful things. I would suggest that a review of the Coming Into the Country section that deals with Eagle and the people along the river, and you are revisiting that in 2000 or 2001. This would be a great academic topic for trying to understand what happened and where all those people went, and was that a good idea that everybody's gone. Anyway, Dick Cook is a big character in McPhee's book. He called him the Swami, right? The sort of the leading bush guy living outside of Eagle, who knew about the outdoors. Your portrayal of him is a little different. It's not as not kind. I don't know. Yours is a little more rough edged, right? Talk about this guy and how he fit into McPhee's book and then your book.
Yeah, he was, I think. Did he say the acknowledged high Swami of the river people? I think so. He said, which the river people would all dispute that they didn't kneel at anybody's feet. Thank you very much. But he definitely was the guy people who came into the country went and saw and learned a little bit about trapping and dog driving and putting up fish and stuff like that. And McPhee, he was the central character in McPhee's book. Well, the book's in actually 3 parts, but one part is Coming Into the Country, and I think of it as a book. I guess I did see a little bit different side of him because he was sort of deliberately slovenly, I mean, it was like a thing. And like one guy told me, you know, he'd have a piece of meat on the floor and get pissed at you if you stepped in it, you know. Or he wouldn't put a pole under the part of his roof porch overhang that was falling down, you know, until everything collapsed. And we went into his cabin after he died, and believe me, it was pretty rough. McPhee had a picture of him as much more tidy and together, but then again, he had a gal out there with him, Donna Nealon, so that may have been why.
But he was younger too. He was in his 40s when McPhee encountered him, right?
Yeah.
And he was close to 70 when you talked to him.
Yeah. I was lucky to talk to him, actually. A little story on that was that the Eagle Historical Society was run by a lady who was very territorial. And when she heard that the University of Alaska was sending somebody up to interview Dick Cook, why she squawked. And the upshot was I was told I couldn't interview him. And so anyway, I thought, well, it doesn't mean I can't meet him. So I swung my canoe in there and had my wife and my little boy was with us, and we met Dick, and I'm so glad we did. You know, so we had an hour or two with him, and I really got a sense of him. And I didn't have my tape recorder on, and I didn't do a formal interview, but then he died, and Eagle never did do their oral history interview with him, so I wouldn't have had anything if I hadn't done that. But yeah, he was the kind of guy who really didn't usually have 2 sticks of firewood to pile on top of each other, and all the machinery he had was broken down, and he didn't really either take care of it or learn to fix it. And so that was truer. He didn't really get out in the country all that much. He didn't meet the trappers right at the next door drainages. I still think he was a really interesting character, important figure, smart. I tell lots of stories about him. It's quite a long section. I think it's maybe the longest section on anybody. And I was fascinated by him, and you could see why McPhee was drawn to him. But it's definitely a mixed portrait of the guy. Said he was either some kind of engineering genius or very competent in the area of frontier gas baggery or something like that. But either a bullshitter or anyway. He was all those things, and I knew his ex-wife and her kid who stayed with him for summers, and other people who knew him pretty well, and I ran all this by them, and they said, "Yep, that's Dick."
And wasn't he the last? I may have these numbers wrong, but there was maybe 200 people living along the river when McPhee did his work, and then by the time you went along, there was nobody left really except for Cook.
Yeah, the numbers are wrong, but yeah,
what are the numbers?
I can't remember.
Okay,
but there were, let's say, scores,
yeah,
perhaps, of people, not counting Canada, because my book covers Canada too. And then by the time I was there, just 2 handfuls max, and now pretty much nothing. Yeah. So it was disappearing, and it was disappearing because of the establishment of the parks and the regulations that came with it, even though ANILCA said this subsistence activity should be protected. By law, it was to be protected. But I faulted the Park Service for the way they managed that, and they really could not abide people living in park lands. And a lot of people who support parks believe that. I don't happen to. And there was a guy that kind of coded to the book as a guy in Ohio who took over a park that had been made a park because of its rural character of farmsteads. So row crops and orchards and woodlots and all that kind of thing, tractors running around, a scenic river with a train going along. And the Park Service took it over, and they kicked everybody out, and they tore down buildings, and it became just an eyesore, and everything grew up. You lost the view of the fields and everything else. And this one superintendent came along and said, I'm turning this whole thing around. I'm putting people back in there and with restrictions appropriate to inhabiting a park. And it can't be anybody. You have a guy, good proposal, and be good stewards of the land. And they put in crops and cleaned out the fields, and he won an award as the most innovative park superintendent in the system. So I thought, that's the kind of thing, not an exact adaptation in the North Country, but something like that could allow for some people to inhabit that wild land. After all, it was made a park because of its human activity there, the gold rush, the steamboats, the mail carriers, all that stuff. And I wanted to see some of that saved.
And the things that attracted these people there, which was really the topic of what McPhee was writing about.
Those qualities of frontier life that are really useful.
Yeah. So as a sociological study, about one of the things that happened in Alaska, this would be a great dissertation for somebody, I think. I guess you ended your book saying, how the day would come when Park Service, temporary employees would be there, college students working in the summer. They'll wear red flannel shirts and spit snooze. They'll hang a few fish so the floaters can see people living the old-time way. And come the first frost, they'll head back to school. As opposed to these people who live these real low-impact lifestyles.
Yeah.
It's not as if they were,
McPhee had a great line. I think it was in a letter to the Secretary of the Interior advocating for cabins and subsistence livers in the park system. And he said, the cabins are small and they are biodegradable. The people are small and they are biodegradable. Several of these cabins could fit in your office.
Yeah. And the Park Service didn't listen to that.
Yeah, well, nominally, but not in fact. The regulations just became too onerous for anybody to do both things, accommodate a bureaucracy and live this kind of life that was antithetical really to that. And then it's become much worse since. There was a period around there when I was writing where much better relations were beginning to be established between like Eagle Circle and the Park Service. And then for some reason the Park Service put in a whole bunch of people who were the law enforcement type of park ranger, and they were all about stopping people and demanding identification and handcuffing people if they didn't want to talk to them. That happened. And that kind of, was it DeWild or somebody who was kind of thrown in the mud and cuffed because he didn't have a $24 sticker on his boat. And none of that should have happened because it took a generation, but they were getting better. They were getting more accepted. It was going the right way.
That whole incident of the Park Service overreaction kind of reminds me of when the IRS, and some of you probably remember this, when there were tax protesters down at the federal building. I can't remember their names, but they were, I think, in their Volkswagen, and they were parked right outside the federal building. And the IRS agents came up and knocked the windows out of the Volkswagen and dragged them out of the... And Eric Muelling, a good photographer, happened to be there and shot photos of the IRS agents dragging these people out of the car. And it became, I know this because one of my wife's brothers, his wife was an IRS instructor. And this incident became a lesson that they taught across the country about not to do things.
What not to do, yeah.
Because it was terrible. It was a really ridiculous federal overreach. That's what I like. It was federal overreach. Anyway, let's move along a little bit. You have another column here about language, which I liked, talking about the troopers. And this is an endemic problem we have. The officer-involved shooting.
Yeah.
and that's used all the time still.
Yeah. And you don't know if the officer shot or was shot. It was involved.
Well, but usually the officer shot.
Usually, but
right?
The thing is...
But it's like, okay, why is that being used? I mean,
to take the actor out of the sentence. It's passive voice constructions where nobody shoots anybody. Can I read that first part of that one? Anybody know what page it is?
Page 95.
Thank you.
I think.
Because I kind of like this opening. You may have noticed that our police forces don't shoot people anymore. In fact, they don't shoot at all. They don't have guns. It used to be they shot people back when they had guns. Later, they discharged their guns. But that was before the guns became service weapons, and they discharged their service weapons. Nowadays, service weapons are utilized. So, and if you look at it, this is exactly how all these things are written, and it takes away from the reader the visual image of somebody shooting somebody. And then, of course, the rest of the piece goes on about how you can't get any information out of the police except what they want to release about the person they shot and their background where it's unflattering. But if you want to know, well, how about the policeman? Has he ever been charged with excessive force? That's under wraps. Or have they ever shot anybody before? How many bullets were fired? 5 or 55? And sometimes it is these extreme numbers. And you can't get the information because it's under investigation, which may last months, years. It's a rigged deal.
Yeah, and you, this, I mean, that particular language problem is only worse since she wrote this, I think. And now you can't escape that. You just can't. Well, we have a lot to go into, but and we don't have a lot more time. But let's talk about Ted Stevens, okay? Now you wrote a column. Well, wait, before we get to that, I want to write about something that was a great thing for me to discover. You have a column in there about Sarah Palin.
Yes.
Right? And you know,
I wrote it the day she was selected.
And I wrote almost exactly this. Well, my column was not as good as yours, but I wrote almost exactly the same thing.
Was it a day later?
No, it was. It was after reading O'Neill. No, I think it was the same day.
Okay.
Well, I got more grief over this particular column than anything in my life.
Really?
Yeah. So the headline was, Vice Presidential Bid Will Open Palin Record to Intense National Media Scrutiny, which I thought was a really good headline. And I was able to write my own headlines on those things. But I will skip what I got wrong in that column, which was I said her gaslighting plan might work.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was wrong.
That was a reach.
Wrong, okay. But I did say, with her selection by McCain, Palin will be subjected to intense scrutiny by the national news media for the first time. It will be unlike anything she has seen in Alaska. I may be proven wrong, but the decision announced by McCain strikes me as reckless. She is not prepared to be the next president should something happen to McCain. People in Fairbanks were really mad with me about this.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought it was very reasonable, but I had seen her close up, and she didn't know what she was doing. And no, I mean, she hired some good people, and I think that's why her administration, such as was successful, because I think she had good people around her, but I don't think she knew a lot of the details. Anyway, you wrote something very similar about Palin, which I thought, did you get any reaction to that? Of course, it was in the Daily News,
It was in
right?
the Daily News. No, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
But I'm amazed that you took a lot of flack for pretty mild.
Well,
Compared to what I was writing.
well, okay, and I did say she wasn't. Yeah, I look at it now and it's pretty mild. I didn't really. I just said she was not qualified to be vice president.
Right. Yeah.
Which I thought, and there was no judgment involved. Well, no, there was a judgment actually. Never mind.
I defended her a lot too in the little intro to the piece. So that's written lately, not back then.
Yeah, that she was a pleasant person.
Well, no, I was pretty bugged by the national media constantly haranguing her about I can see Russia from my house. And, she never said that. So
She said you can see Russia from Alaska.
which is true.
Right?
Yeah,
So people do not care if Tina Fey said this or not. So it was Tina Fey, of course, right? Right? It was Tina Fey.
Well, no, all kinds of journalists, and mostly.
But Tina Fey said that, and then it was
Maybe it was.
ask
her
people
first.
today, and most people in America would say she said that, right? It was an SNL joke.
Well, it was a joke that went like wildfire
Yeah.
everywhere, and it was routinely, she was labeled with that. And the thing was that bugged me was that our proximity to Russia is a point of qualification for an Alaska governor to run for national office with foreign policy credibility. We border Russia. We also border Canada. We're the only state that borders two nations.
Yeah, but she
And
had no foreign policy experience. And,
I'm
and
just
her,
saying.
Her claim was because we're close to Russia, that made her qualified. That was the essence of her claim.
Yeah, I don't even think she herself understood that. She had reason to tout her relationships because there was international negotiations through State Department, but we had state representatives for like fish treaties with Canada and so on. And unlike most governors in most states, she had the opportunity anyway to deal with foreign countries as part of her mandate as governor. But like I say, she may not even have known that.
All right. Well, let's move on to Ted Stevens.
Ted Stevens.
Okay. You can you read that intro on page 126?
126.
The first paragraph.
Okay. If I were to pick one example of Alaskans being blind to a reality shared by the rest of the nation, this would be it. From professors to journalists to archivists to the guys sitting around the stove in the roadhouse, the arbiters of history have totally sanitized the transparent corruption of Alaska's most influential political figure, the late U.S. Senator Ted Stevens. See, now that's way more provocative than what you said about Sarah Palin.
Right, but see, I didn't say that.
Great. So,
Well, okay, and let's.
you want to know what my thing there was, is that basically it was, and then I go on to say it's quite like Trump, where Ted was convicted of 7, I think it was,
Yeah.
counts of taking gifts, like bribes, while he was, from Bill Allen, while Bill Allen had business before his committee, okay? Took a $44,000 car from the guy and remodeled the house and all this stuff. I don't remember all the details, but.
The grill, did you forget the grill?
And the vibrating chair and everything else. Well,
The dog.
And then there was apparently prosecutorial misconduct, and the Justice Department decided to vacate all the convictions, or I guess that's
Yes.
the proper term. And so even the ones where there wasn't prosecutorial misconduct, the charges were not pressed or whatever, or he never suffered a consequence. I guess they were vacated. So there were charges that were not involved in the improper prosecution that he remained convicted of until they vacated. So he and all his supporters said total exoneration, which is exactly what Trump does every time he has one little victory and a slew of convictions. He leaps on the same kind of defense.
And this column you wrote was in 2008, after he was indicted and before he was convicted. But I thought it was pretty good, or actually it might have been right after his conviction. He was indicted by the Bush administration in August, I think it was, demanded he have a speedy trial. And because he demanded he have a speedy trial, he lost his
Election.
He was convicted, then he lost. I do think that whole question is another fascinating topic that's unexamined, really. In Lisa Murkowski's new book, she, I think, downplays what's really the real issue here, and that was the immense power held by Bill Allen, the founder and head of VICO. Well, I guess he wasn't the founder necessarily, but the head of VICO, and his total influence over the Republican Party money machine. And it was not just Republicans, it was some Democrats as well. But the story today is, Bill Allen, he was just a corrupt guy that nobody paid attention to.
Yeah.
And we're sort of missing what happened here. The closest that Senator Murkowski comes, I think, to acknowledging the depth of this was a sentence in her book in which she says that, and I can't find it now, Bill Allen chose him as a friend, right? And maybe that was, but it was true that Ted had chosen Bill Allen as a friend.
Ted or Jones.
Among many unanswered questions, Alaskans have wondered why. Well, I know why. It was money. It was money. He had tremendous influence in Alaska politics. And what's mentioned in your column, which I thought was particularly apt, is the things that weren't charged, things that didn't become part of the court case. And that is, Ben Stevens had a job with VICO in which he didn't have to say what he was doing. And according to Bill Allen, he was just on the payroll because he was Ben Stevens.
For $750,000.
Yeah, quite a bit of money. And so there were a lot of other things related to this that need to be unearthed and examined. Part of our problem is nobody has done a credible book on Ted Stevens. There's nothing of any merit on it. His papers are under the control of the Ted Stevens Foundation in Anchorage, and the university has made a deal with the Ted Stevens Foundation to what I consider will be they're going to make it into a political shrine, not just for Ted Stevens, but for anybody else who provides their papers to the archive in Anchorage. And it's
and doesn't the family have some sort of right of approval over who can access?
They still control the access now.
Yeah, so that
and even though the state has spent money on this, the legislature gave $1 million to have when the papers were here. Papers were here. They should have been opened 10 years ago here, but then the foundation got mad and they took the papers down to Anchorage. Anyway, no one has written about this. I don't expect a real complete story. What Lisa is saying is part of it, and what this column that you had, that's part of it as well. I don't really know. There's too much here that's unknown that we just can't. It's reckless to make any firm pronouncements about it. But here it's just all vanished. It's all There's no historian that I know that's going to be doing this independently. My guess is they'll find somebody to do a sponsored book where you.
If I wait long enough, he'll say what.
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, right.
Dan, I'm sorry.
No, it's like having
Tell me to just shut up. Tell me, shut up.
No, I think it's kind of atrocious that the university made a deal. I might get this wrong, so don't hold me to it. Subject to check. But that they gave the papers to the Ted Stevens family, and they can control who has access. So if you look like you're, let's say, a critical journalist or historian who might want to write about Ted, you're probably not going to get to see the papers. As in me. Yeah,
I think that's true. And they've had all these years,
so it's
to remove whatever they found distasteful. Ted Stevens wrote, and I saw some examples of it, kind of intemperate, let's say.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, what did he say?
And so, anyway, so it's unfortunate. Anyway, I like that column. I want to do one more thing before we do questions, and that is your columns about Poker Flat and the Scud missile thing. And how that, that's also relevant today.
How much time do we have, Michelle? Ultra fast.
He could do this in a couple minutes.
I really don't want to stop, okay? But I know that you guys agreed to do some questions.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if we sort of...
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can ask anything. No.
All right. Awesome.
No, Terrence, you can't ask.
All right.
But John is back there. Let me just say, we will do some questions and answers, and before we go to that, Can we all agree that we would like them to do part 2 next summer? Would you like that? The Dan and Dermot Cole. Okay, well, did you want to have a final wrap-up?
Okay, quick on the scuds. I think that's what got me fired. So maybe that's a good way to wrap up the talk. But I heard about a launch that was going to take place at Poker Flat that was classified. They wouldn't say what the missile was. And so naturally I was curious. And I heard they were going to have a meeting of the neighbors out there because the neighbors were going to be evacuated for this launch. And so I just sort of went along and crashed that little meeting. And I mean, I didn't fool anybody. They actually asked who everybody was, so they knew who I was and that I didn't live there. But anyway, they wouldn't say much about it, but I asked what the rocket burned, which I didn't know anything about rockets or anything else, but I thought anything I could get out of them might help me. And so they said it burned kerosene and an oxidizer called inhibited red fuming nitric acid, which is a nasty. So I went, and by then we had Google and stuff, and so I looked it up. But anyway, there was a lot of rockets that burned that fuel and oxidizer, and the way you could figure out which it might be would be to know how far it could travel, the range. And so I figured if I went to the range manager and asked, well, how far is your flight going to go, that he'd figure out what I was trying to figure out and wouldn't tell me. So instead I called him up and I kind of put on my greenie hat and I said, you know, if you guys are going to crash this rocket with that nasty stuff on board into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, I think that's a travesty because we made that a National Wildlife Refuge to protect. And he goes, Dan, relax. We're not going to shoot it into ANWR. And I said, well, the Yukon Flats is a National Wildlife Refuge too. It's the largest duck incubator in North America, 150 million ducks. And I was going like that. And he said, Dan, it's not going to land in the Yukon Flats refuge. And then I had it because there's not that much room between those two refuges. And meant 150 miles, it meant it was a scud. And then the other thing was that they released 4 like environmental impact statements, but they were classified, low level of classification, like official use only or something like that. And anyway, oddly enough, I was able to get a hold of all 4 of those documents, and they didn't name the missile, but they had drawings of the launch vehicle, which is super specialized truck designed for that missile to drive it, to elevate it and launch it. And anyway, between all those measurements, you know, and they had measurements of the rocket too, I think. And anyway, I could figure out it was a Scud all right. And then I called up these guys at MIT, arms control experts, really sharp guys. I'd seen their work in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And they said, you either got a Scud B or somebody built a replica of a Scud B, because that's what it is. And so then, there was a new editor at the News Miner, brand new, and she was new to Alaska too, and she was a military spouse, but she had a lot of political chops. But anyway, I didn't know her, but she was so new, and I called up and said, I got something I've been working on for weeks, I think it's a big scoop. Can I have 2 days in a row, my column 2 days in a row? She said no. I asked, okay, could I at least have 1,000 words instead of 750? She said no. I said, could I have it on a Sunday? She said no. I said, could I put a graphic alongside it? She said no. And I kind of silently said, you know, I think this is a good story, God damn it. And so I served it up to the Daily News on a silver platter. And they sent their ace investigative guy up, Richard Maurer, and they sat him down at the cabin, raided all my files out there. The story was solid. And then he called up Poker Flat and basically blew the whistle on her. And at that point, the military canceled the project. And so the city and town lost a fair bit of military spending, as did the university. And then the editor called me up when I should say, the Daily News did banner headline, color picture, page 1, big story. jump page had color pictures more. I think there was even a third jump page. They did a huge splashy story, like it deserved. And when the editor saw that, I think her head exploded, and she called me up to suggest my days were numbered, which indeed they were. So that's the story.
And had the university been forthcoming about this, there could have been a community discussion about whether or not this is
Yeah.
the proper thing to do. And I guess one reason I'd say that that topic is relevant now is because with the extra money for Golden Dome and other things like this, there was a desire to launch more rockets for Poker Flat and bigger rockets.
So
So-
military,
Department of Defense
classified
rockets.
and
Yeah.
weapons related, and the university had never done that before. This is what really got me excited. It wasn't that they'd crash all this earthna into the wilderness, which might be bad, might really be a showstopper, I don't know. But what I did know was that the university was sliding into classified military weapons research without anybody knowing and no discussion of it. And it should have been something the faculty senate addressed, because it seemed to me at odds with the university's own mission statement, which is all about acquiring knowledge and sending it outward via teaching and publication and so forth, not developing knowledge and sequestering it. So that was my main reason for blowing the whistle.
Okay, I'm sorry for talking so long, interrupting you, Dan, here, but maybe we can have some questions. How do we want to do this? Somebody raise a question. Anybody?
Okay, did John Davies, did you?
Sean McGuire.
Sean McGuire, yes.
Oh, Sean, well, Sean.
You can just toss it or pass it. It's that box right there. Just speak into the black dot on top. And you can toss it around.
So, yeah, this is great. You guys need to finish up next year. But two things real quick. Dermot, I call Dermot the tip of the spear. I don't know how many people in here we just call him, but he is doing the best journalism in Alaska at this point.
Thank you.
And then, Dan, one thing that's really interesting to me is, the News Miner is no longer run by SED. It's no longer an extremely right-wing paper. For the first time ever, it's kind of middle of the road now. And it's a nonprofit. And, your work was so exceptional. I remember people would, get the paper just to read Dan's column. It was the best thing in the paper. I think it was probably the best thing in the paper ever. And I'm just curious, if a petition went around to the News Miner calling, asking the News Miner to bring you back, would you consider that?
Don't put me on the spot or anything, Sean. Sean should be my agent. He told the Anchorage Daily News when I got fired that it was the worst firing since the San Francisco Chronicle fired Mark Twain. That's my man.
I think it's a good question, though. Why don't you answer his question?
We'll see.
Regarding the foundation, I don't think the paper would exist right now if it wasn't owned by a nonprofit foundation. So,
And I do think you're right. It's changed enormously. Yeah.
anyone else?
Okay.
Dan, as I remember it, one big reason for your firing was your comments about William Ransom Wood after his death. Is that accurate?
I don't think so, but I did. I made a lot of enemies with that, for sure. It was the column that drew the most flack for me. There was even an organized letter writing campaign by a civic group. So there were quite a number of letters to the editor complaining about that.
And you have a note here about how the column was run right after his death,
Yeah,
and the newspaper should have held it a little bit.
I
Yeah.
asked the editor to hold it till the next week so that, tributes to him could fill the first week. I thought,
Yeah.
fine. I mean, I wanted what I had to say to be in the record. And I lamented that the Newsminer didn't do it because they did call me and I did give them suitably polite and cautiously phrased comments that might have gone in the retrospective article, but didn't. They just said it, they didn't do it. So that's why I was prompted to write it. And like I say, I wanted it
It's
to
in the-
be
it's
there,
in the
but I
book.
didn't want it to be that week. But the editor insisted it should go right away before people forgot about it or something. So I took a lot of flack for that decision.
So, Dan, I think if we look at the arc from Firecracker Boys through the Rampart Dam story and then to the Scud missiles, there's a pattern there. And I think that we ought to take a look whether or not it's continued with the Cole bill.
Yeah. Agreed. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but Dermot's right. We should have really some specialist in this state tracking that kind of thing.
I mean, that's something that a university professor or scholar should be
Graduate student. even.
looking at, yeah.
Did you cover Don Young and Abramoff?
Did I ever cover Don Young?
And Jack
Oh,
A.
Abramoff. Not the latter, but I covered Young a fair bit. Yeah, I thought he was a pretty easy target often enough, and I went after him. I thought he was a buffoon, just an outrageously ignorant, bombastic human being, and it caused us a lot of grief, I think. I think he was on the wrong side of just about everything, and where it was appropriate, I let him have it. I thought he was a bully, too. The hell with him.
Yeah, Dan, this is Rich Seifert. I wanted to ask you, you were the only person I've ever seen mention the question of whether the university was slipping into doing secret government research, military, that sort of thing. And you mentioned Norman Suazo being the president, and I was on the faculty senate then, and it was a very, very sad day for faculty because what happened was they twisted the idea of academic freedom into using it to say it's a violation of my academic freedom to not be able to do the secret research. That was, how do you argue that? That's a very, very strange position, but I was obviously on the other side and I was very outnumbered, but a lot of science faculty were doing research that, you're going to take away my academic freedom to do secret research, research, and you either have that policy as a faculty or you don't. And it never really got further than that. I just wanted to say that because I've never heard it raised since then. It's always been buried. It troubled me greatly at the time. It still troubles me. And I'm one of the few witnesses that knows it still happened. Norman's still around, but he's outside somewhere. But thank you for raising that, at least pointing to it.
Yeah, I think the proper place for that to be debated is in the faculty senate. I think the faculty is the core of the university, not the administration and not the students who come and go pretty rapidly. And they should construct the mission statement of the university, whatever you want to call it, and they should argue for what kind of university we collectively want to be. And you can't do absolutely anything you want under the name of academic freedom. You can't experiment on human subjects without their permission. You can't destroy or contaminate. There's any number of legitimate restrictions that might be placed on research. But that would be something, I think, properly debated by the scholars in assembly.
Hey Dan, thanks so much for doing this talk. This has been really illuminating. I'm new to the area. Do you have any advice for journalists who are new to Fairbanks?
No. I'm not so persuaded I did anything right. So, what do you say, Dermot? Come on now. You always got the answer.
I probably have advice that's probably not very good, but, I don't know. I have a sort of a pessimistic attitude about, and once, A.J. Liebling famously said, freedom of the press belongs to someone who owns one. Today, that's we have the opposite situation. Freedom of the press belongs to everyone. And since it belongs to everyone, we are sort of drowning in a sea of information, misinformation, and disinformation. And it's for all of its failures, the old systems, at least there were efforts to do things right. A lot of that is now missing. It's been handed over to guys who have made a great deal of money in high tech, who don't really care about the quality of information. They just care about getting a big audience as possible. So anyway, I'm not a good one to ask about this.
Well, I actually think this kind of the same thing is that there was nothing wrong with the old way. I mean, there are here and there codified journalistic code of ethics. And if, they're based on giving voice to a wide range of sources, confronting the people you criticize and giving them a shot back at you, verifying before you put it in print. There's all these kind of things that got to be the code for good reason. And I think that's a good start, is to just stick with that, really.
I agree, yeah.
Do we have any other questions for these gentlemen? Okay, Tom Hewitt, awesome.
Oh, you are doing an event with Tom, next week?
On the 19th.
19th. And when we're done, I'll remind everybody that books are available in the back.
Attaboy, Dermot.
Including the author, he'll be available.
Thanks for mentioning the event on the 19th. Part of this was a sneaky way to advertise that event. It is on the 19th. There are some other authors involved, but Dan and I will be having a conversation at the event starts at 6. Our starts at 30, so anybody who wants to come along and see a different conversation, maybe one where Dan used to talk for a greater percentage. I guess you used the term because I know you since I was 5 years older.
Where is this event going to be, Tom? So, right.
Don't tell him.
Where like the old ADA's steakhouse sort of used to be, by I guess Noodle and stuff like that. Not guess Noodle House. Anyway, just wanted to kind of raise the question. Both of you, Dermot and Dan, kind of occupied, or then and now, sort of the same space of the kind of the commentariat, and that seems like it's kind of on the ascendance in terms of what people want to see in terms of the media that they consume. How do you feel about that? It certainly seems like, on one hand, you've got people who are seeking people who will speak truth to power. On the other hand, you're also seeking out sources that largely agree with the biases that we kind of carry into situations. I guess speak to that a little
Sure, give me the hard ones. Well, let's see. I love opinion journalism. I love to read it, and because, if I think it's really thoughtful and grappling with knotty issues, untangling it, deconstructing it, setting it out in a way you can kind of understand it and a way through the mess. I just admire that a lot. And so I think I like that more than news reportage. But, and I guess I should say too, that as we've been going along here, issue 1, issue 2, reminds me of the McLaughlin group, which used to be on PBS. I loved that show, even though they were all shouting over each other. Terrence and I used to actually imitate that sometimes. And so the commentariat I have a soft spot for, but I get what you're saying, that so many people are just cutting to that without ever getting very informed to start with. And that's the real journalism part, and that's fading so fast. I mean, probably if you looked at the years of experience of reporters on our paper or most papers now, it's not very many. And so some of that art's being lost and being surrendered to the internet in a way that's, not healthy. And then, so I read the New York Times, which I think by and large does a really good job. I read the Washington Post, although I'm less happy with them. And I read the San Francisco Chronicle and the Daily News. And anyway, I appreciate real journalism a lot and recognize it as something we need to protect. And if it seems old-fashioned, it's still the way at it, the way at the truth. What do you say, Dermot?
Well, I agree with you about the New York Times. I think the New York Times is the best paper in the United States. And the Washington Post recently has entered a very dangerous phase where it's rapidly getting worse. One thing that bothered me a little bit, I don't know if this speaks to that problem or not, Tom, but Julia O'Malley did a pretty good local reaction to the Trump-Putin summit. The headline said, and this might be getting one of the things you're complaining about, Tom, but the headline said, Trump and Putin may get a cold reception from some Alaskans. Well, may? I mean, I was just like, why is that may?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, the truth is, you can analyze this and see that we'll get a cold reception from some Alaskans. Now, maybe that's nitpicky in my own, bias. Of course, it's my bias, but in traditional, this anyway. That's not answering it. I don't know. I happen to think I do shoot my mouth off sometimes, but I try to have it backed up by facts, or at least some. I don't make up anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, really, you are doing it. You are doing it in that blog. It's not in a newspaper, but you are, with all those links you put in there, you're footnoting your work, which is amazing, which, I never had to do in the newspaper stuff. And you're breaking about a story a week or more. And so you are doing real journalism. It's just online in a blog context.
And it's opinionated. I mean, I couldn't help but deal with this thing today of Trump twice saying he's going to Russia this week. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the lead of his press conference he gave this morning, but it's not in the AP story, and it's not in the NPR story, and I don't know. I mean, he said it, twice. But that's not going to be, I deal with that in this piece I wrote today. It's in the paper, it's in the blog. I'm sorry,
it
Tom,
out.
I didn't answer your question. You'll have to ask him again. so. All right. Are we,
You know, it's nice, it's amazing that we have these icons with us and willing to share their views over and over and over again. Because this one was created at the last minute, so I don't know how you found out about it. Maybe you found out about it because you get our newsletter from summer sessions every week. If you were not on that list, I would be glad to take your email and we will be glad to inform people about what's happening in the community as well as what's happening here on campus. And I was going to tell Tom, if you have a flyer, we'll be glad to add it to that. So if you belong to an organization, this is a sort of an infomercial, but I'm not selling anything, I'm giving it away, of an event that's happening in our community, we will be glad to send it out to our listserv that has right now over 3,000 people in it. So this is not only for summer, this is year-round, okay? So we will hear about Tom's event, and I don't know what Shirley Gordon is doing or what Nisha and Roger are doing, but if they're involved in a community event, please let us know. We'll be glad to get the word out. And I cannot thank you both very, very much for your willingness to regale us with the lessons that we need to learn over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you.